Hi, I'm going to pass through the land of mathematics and then tell a story. And here I am on the Penrose Paving, the Penrose tiling, the pattern of irregular things that aren't squares, but that yet cover the entire surface that I mentioned in my last video. And I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story, and this concerns Tolkien, myth, the creation of myths, black and white magic, and magic of other colours. I've got to be a little bit careful to avoid copyright violation here because the story is still in copyright. And I'm going to start with some background. This will be familiar to most people who've read a novel about magic, the sort of magic that involves spell books and drawing complex 5-pointed diagrams on paper and summoning demons. It'll probably be familiar to anybody who's read or watched Harry Potter, but it won't be familiar to everybody, so I'm going to explain that first. And if you have, so let's start with Harry Potter. If you have read Harry Potter, you know that you can make spells. You can lock somebody's legs together and stop them walking by reciting it's the Locomotor Rigidis spell, I think. I believe there's a time-turning spell, and there are lots of others. And the idea is in Harry Potter that words said in the right way and in the right order have power. In our universe, they don't. Before you can utter a sequence of words that makes a house appear, you have to convey them to a builder, spend a lot of money, and then wait for 6 months. But in Harry Potter's universe, you just say the words in the right way and probably with the right gestures, and possibly while holding a wand, attired in a robe and wearing a pointy hat, and a house appears. The same sort of thing happens in Terry Pratchett Discworld novels, except that there it's satirised, it's made fun of a lot of the time. So that's magic. One of the things you can generally do in these magical worlds is to invoke demons. The stories tend to assume that there is a region, perhaps hell, perhaps somewhere else, where demons live. And although the demons are very powerful and they can do really horrible things to you, they can at the same time be controlled. And the way you control a demon typically is by drawing complicated diagrams on the ground. Usually these diagrams have 5 sides and they may be called pentacles or pentagrams. And then you make some complicated gestures, probably after lighting half a dozen wax candles of various scents. And a demon appears in the pentacle or pentagram. So if that's a pentacle, it's only got 3 sides, not 5, but let's assume, then a demon will appear here. And although the demon will hate you and will want to break out of the pentagram or pentacle, it can't, because it is constrained by a magical rule of the universe. And in these stories, these magical rules are as unbreakable as the laws of physics are in our universe. A demon can no more get out of its confinement than a brick will suddenly float in the air here. Why would anybody want to raise demons? Well, because they're incredibly powerful. They can give you forbidden knowledge. They can give you knowledge of things that man was not meant to know, but that they know because they live in a different realm. And they can do things for you. They might go to distant places on Earth and find treasures. They might go to magical lands in other realms, let's say, and find magical objects there. Say, a stone that you can rub and that will give you a feeling of contentment and joy and peace every time you rub it. That would be very useful, I think. And if I ever find out how to raise demons, I'm going to order one. It's better than Amazon. They might give you an elixir that you can drink, and that will taste of anything you want, whether it's roast beef with gravy and Yorkshire pudding, or a Tesco triple chocolate Belgian trifle, like the one I ate on or looking over Hinksey Hill. So demons can give you knowledge, and they can do things for you, and they can get you things, and that's why people would want to raise demons. And some people would want to raise demons just because it's inherently interesting. It's knowledge for its own sake. They're intrigued by how the magical world works, and how the patterns and the forces and the laws in it are different from those in our world. And that is the urge that makes people do mathematics, or at least it's the urge that makes some people do mathematics. Do you see the similarity with the Penrose tiling? So to summarise, there is a genre, a kind of story where one of the main subjects is magic, and you can make magic by uttering spells or by writing spells or by making gestures with your hand, and quite often you wear funny robes and such like, and you may even be able to raise demons, and you can gain marvellous knowledge, intriguing knowledge that you can do things with, or that's wonderful for its own sake in the way that maths is wonderful. Okay, so that's the basis of magic. Well, as far as we know, there is no magic in this universe, although I do remember quite a few computers and other bits of machinery that have refused to operate when I went anywhere near them, and a friend who even made me get out of his car because it wouldn't start until I got out of it. But that's by the way. That's what magic would be like. Now I have to talk a bit about different types of magic. In everyday speech we talk about black magic and we talk about white magic. White magic is good, and it may be associated in some stories with angels. Black magic is bad, and it's associated with demons. And with, I think it's milk tray, isn't it? Those chocolates that the black-clad hero hands over to the lady. As far as we know, in this universe, there is neither black magic or white magic. But this type of story often works by setting up a consistent universe that is not like ours, with a different system of rules, and then lets that be It's as if you've written a story about a planet where gravity is 10 times what it is here. And you've then said, okay, let's let that universe run for a bit and just see what happens in it. What would life be like if you were in such a universe? One science fiction writer who did that was called Hal Clement, and he wrote a story, Mission of Gravity, about creatures that lived on a planet where the gravity varied from, I think it was 3 times ours to about 300 times. And amongst the differences were that these creatures were all extremely long. They were like centipedes because they needed lots of legs to support themselves. They were very close to the ground because a fall of any distance would kill them. The point here is that it's a physical law that the greater gravity is, the faster things fall and the greater the speed at which they hit the ground. So you really, really, really don't want to hit the ground on a high gravity planet. And to go with that, they had developed a fear of falling. Okay, so now I have a sort of general class of story where you set up a new universe, which is like ours in some way, but not like ours in others. And then you say, right, we'll keep it following those rules. What happens next? What are the people like who live in it, or the aliens like who live in it? If gravity was really that strong, how would we travel? How would we get around? How would we stay safe? If we really could invoke demons, what would we do? Suppose that a technological civilization like ours learnt how to invoke demons. What would it do? How would it change the building trade? And I'm not making that up. A science fiction writer, very famous amongst science fiction readers, called Robert Heinlein, actually wrote a book called, I think it was a short novel, called Magic Incorporated, in which he imagines a USA and America which is like ours, except that magic actually works. And if you're an ironmonger, for example, you can sell conventional building materials, but you can also sell building materials that have spells embedded in them, and the spells make them super strong, or they mean that you have to pay less for the material because it can be weaker, and yet the spell will still make it hold things up. Of course, novels are not novels without conflict, and most of the stories set in universes like this have conflict, and Magic Incorporated did too. Heinlein was writing at a time when the notion of a machine, which I have a feeling we might call it a deep state today, I'm not sure, a sort of group of inner people, a bit like DOGE under Trump and Musk now, takes over the levers of power and starts running things to its own advantage, a sort of mafia. And Heinlein imagines that people like that have got control of magic. Well, they've got control of the legal laws, the laws made to control the use of magic, and they're perverting them for their own good. And what they do is, for example, to set up businesses that sell magic use very cheaply. And they make these businesses so cheap that nobody else can compete with them. And so everybody starts buying their magical services, their magical building materials, magical bricks, from these businesses. And eventually no one else can compete, and the independent businesses go bust. And that just leaves you with the sort of illegally controlled, the mafia-controlled business. And then what does it do? It jacks up its prices until people can't bear it. but they still have to buy from it because now it's the only business left. Now, I believe that this happens in our universe too. And what that shows is that in these stories, people may still be people. They may still have the same emotions, the same politics, the same types of business as we do here. But nevertheless, there are changes, and it's fun to explore those changes. And this whole operation is called universe building in science fiction, or world building. You imagine a world which is like ours in some ways, but different in others, and you try to work it out as consistently as possible and make it a bit entertaining, and then you can set detective stories or crime stories or thrillers or love stories or whatever. When you mix love or romance with fantasy, that is, with the stuff that uses magic, it's called romantasy. And there are other combinations too. So that's a basic introduction to stories that are set in slightly different, in different worlds to our own. And it applies to all such stories, whether they are based on hard technology or on magic. And it applies to them regardless of what kind of magic they use. Now, I said yesterday, when I was walking through the science area, that nature does not give up her secrets easily. In the old sexist days, people used to probably say that was because nature was a she, but we wouldn't say that now, would we? And any number of scientists have written in their autobiographies about the trouble they've had making nature give up her secrets. And so, by the way, have mathematicians. If you want to try and understand what it is like to be a working mathematician, one very good book is by somebody called Paul, normal spelling, Halmos, Halmos. And he was a mathematician. He wrote several textbooks which are still used by university students, and he did a fair amount of original research, and he was very, very meticulous, very, very careful in following an academic career and helping colleagues as much as he could, and helping secretaries as much as he could, and making everybody be as professional as they could, because that's what he believed in. And he wanted to keep mathematics going and keep it developing. And if you read his book, you'll certainly come across words and phrases and concepts that you don't know, but you may be able to skip past them and still get some of the feel of what it's like to work in that sort of job. It's a bit hard for me to tell these days because I am a mathematician amongst other things. And if Halmos were writing today, he would be writing, were he in Oxford, here, amongst the Penrose tiling. Okay, so we now have several points that I've made. One is building alternate worlds to use in stories. One is that these can be magical worlds, though they don't have to be. Yet another is that the use of magic can be constrained. You may have to follow strict rules, and most of the world may act like ours, except that if you've got sufficient power or sufficient money or sufficient whatever it is that you've dug up from some hitherto unexplored mine under the Arctic, you may be able to raise demons or make bricks float or whatever. And then you've also got the point that it is probably very, very hard to learn to do this well. Because in these worlds too, nature doesn't give up her secrets easily. So it requires a lot of training to become a successful magic user. It requires as much training as it does here to learn to, I don't know, write machine learning algorithms or wire computer chips together into working computers or something like that, to design integrated circuits, to synthesize organic compounds. It's hard, it's exhausting, it stretches your mind to its limit, and while doing this, you are moving in a world which has its own alien rules. And yet that world is sort of within ours. And the analogy I mean here is mathematics. The Mathematics Institute is in our world. The mathematicians are very much in our world. They drink coffee, they eat, they go to the loo. And yet when they do maths, they are following rules that are completely different from what's in our world. And it takes a lot of skull sweat, as the Americans say, to understand them and to use them fluently. By fluent, I mean like speaking a language without having to think much about it. Okay, so I've added another point. Magic can be difficult, and it takes a lot of years to learn. In some of these stories, you have universities where you have to follow a degree course in magic. Much like Harry Potter in Hogwarts, only at university level. And that's a very reasonable extrapolation from our world of what magic would be like if it actually worked. Okay, so let's go a bit further. We've got white magic and black magic, but there might be other types of magic too. And there's a story called Green Magic by Jack Vance, who now I think he passed away in 2013. His stories are still in copyright though. Who was a well-known science fiction writer. He created baroque, complicated, over-the-top worlds, sort of full of excessive decoration and curlicues everywhere, often set at the end of time in a universe on an Earth which was full of the partly failed and gone wild genetic experiments of 100 past eras, weird creatures everywhere, strange foods, and magic too. Green magic is not quite like that. It's set in contemporary America, and it concerns somebody who finds somebody else who has worked on white magic and black magic, and then discovered that there were other types of magic too which sort of go beyond it. And one of these is green magic. He gets a taste, the protagonist gets a taste of green magic from the guy he found out about it from. And it is so beautiful, the patterns behind it. I quoted in my previous video the science fiction writer Greg Egan, who said that the greatest gift of consciousness is to take the patterns of the universe into your own mind. And that is not merely to know them, but to know that you know them, to be able to see them in their whole as artworks. The person who first found out about green magic, and the protagonist who he found out, who passed his knowledge on to him, that's what he's done. He's sort of internalized the beauty of green magic, and he longs to know more about it. There are some things he'd like to do with it to make his life better, but mainly he just wants to know about it for his own sake, like those guys probably do with maths, and all the people in there do. So he summons demons and does other things, and he finds inhabitants of the green magic land who agree to teach him. And he learns, and he learns, and he learns, and he sweats, and he does the equivalent of passing magical finals, as if he were attired in sparkling green robes outside the green magic examination schools. But in the end, he can't hack it, as the Americans say. His mind isn't up to it. And he gives up. And he returns back to this earth. And it's that moral that there may be things that you desperately want to know, but that you can't because your mind isn't up to it, that seems to me to be relevant to Oxford and to other universities and to places like this, whichever university they're in. And it's something that I have never seen any of the other tourist guides talk about, but it infuses the place, and it infuses the place much more than Harry Potter or red telephone boxes or, I don't know, even Ascension Day and beating the bounds does. It's part of the essence of Oxford. Oxford has been dubbed the city of lost causes. I'm not sure why, but maybe that is one reason, because people working at a university would have felt that ever since the university was built. Okay, so I'm going to finish because I'm running out of battery. That's a sort of truth about universities and other research organisations and places where people think hard in general. And it's that sort of truth that Tolkien thought could be conveyed by myth. In everyday English, I know 3 usages of the word myth. One is something that's not true, such as the moon landing was a myth. It all happened in Hollywood. The second meaning, is a story that's full of gods and other supernatural creatures, quite often Greek gods, such as Jupiter. And such stories may feature people turning into swans and daffodils and trees and all sorts of things. And the third meaning is the one that Tolkien felt was the main meaning and the important meaning to him. It's a structured story set in a created universe of the type that I've described, a consistent universe built by the author in a consistent act of world building. And it features a collection of individuals, and the way they behave in what are probably difficult circumstances tells the reader something important about human psychology or human emotions, or love, or the way people think about mathematics. The individuals described in the story have probably never existed, but they're a sort of template. When you read about them, you can see how real individuals put into the same situation would behave. So that, to Tolkien, was the important aspect of myth. And that, it seems, was at least one of the reasons for his writing The Lord of the Rings and the other stories. He wanted to convey important truths using these myths. And I should say again, he wasn't trying to say that there are genuinely things like orcs and elves and wizards, just that they, if we pretend that they are, their behaviour sort of models important situations, and we can learn from it. This is sometimes called symbolic truth in literature. He wrote a poem about this called Mythopoeia, which I will look at in another video. And apparently he did that while he was sitting in the examination schools, watching the students to make sure that they didn't cheat. And that is one reason why the examination schools is important to Oxford. It's where Tolkien created something very important to his literature. Because like writing just about any other essay, it helped him set his ideas. The act of writing forces you to state things clearly, whether it's an essay or a poem. So in this video, I've stood outside the Maths Institute on the Penrose tiling, and I've talked about created universes, world building, Robert Heinlein, Jack Vance, green magic, spells, myths, and Tolkien. See you next time.